Welcome back. Now the front forks on this bike and I have a difficult history. Although they appear in decent nick from a few feet away, the slight pitting on the chrome stanchions has meant I've had to replace the seals 3 times in the 2 years I've owned it. So I've opted to fork out, get it, for some new stanchions, which means I'll need to take the bottom lugs off. So let's get them stripped. I took off the axle pinch bolts, which will need this awful gold finish removed and given a fresh zinc plate. While the springs are still put in tension on the damper rod, I had a go at the bottom bolt with an impact driver, but as is often the case, it just span the rod inside the tube. But I've got a method for that down the line. I'd already cracked the top caps when they were in the yokes, so I was able to get them off easily on the bench. I slid the outer tube down and poured out what remained of the oil. You can see how often I was doing this, but just how clean and fresh the oil is. I did the other side and left them upside down to drain for a while. I compressed the spring and slid the holding tool under the lock nut on the damper rod. This gave me full spanner access so I could remove the top cap. With the cap removed, I slid out the holding tool and removed the spring. Then I took out the push rod for the rebound adjuster. With a small flathead screwdriver, I pried off the dust seal, slid it down and removed the metal spring clip from inside the outer tube. The tubes and bushes then act as a slide hammer, which after a few sharp tugs separates the tubes. With the tube laid down, I removed the top bush, the bottom bush, the washer and the old seals. I held tension on the damper rod with a wooden dowel and had another go at the bottom bolt. This time it span free, allowing me to remove the damper rod from the tube. The last thing to remove from the bottom lug was the compression damping adjuster. Then I did the same for the other fork leg. Well, that's the forks disassembled. The next task was to remove the old stanchions from the fork bottoms. I put a good amount of heat into the grub screw that presses into the threads on the bottom of the stanchion. Now, a trick I've had some success with before when trying to avoid rounding out a hex is to use some valve grinding paste. It fills in the little gaps and it also bites into both metals, reducing the chance of slipping. Sometimes the tops of these are peened over to stop them coming loose, but it didn't look like this one had been. After taking it gentle at first, I started to spin it freely and it came out nicely. I put the fork bottom between some wooden blocks on the vise and applied loads of heat and penetrant to the area around the threads on the stanchion. There's loads of thread locking compound in here that needs to break free. Then with an old screwdriver in the holes in the tube, I tried to loosen it. No luck on the first go. I was going to end up breaking that screwdriver if I carried on, so I gave it more heat and more penetrant. And considering the tubes are junk anyway, I drilled out the holes to take a girthier lever. Lol. After loads of grunting but very little success, I figured I'd take a break and have a go with the other side. For this one, the grub screw had been peened over, so I used a drill to remove the lip, and followed the same technique as the other side. Oops. This time I wasn't so lucky, so I looked for another way to grip it. I found a Torx bit that was the right size to tap in and bite into the grub screw. And this really is when my world started to fall apart. In a moment of sheer stupidity, I thought it would be a good idea to use the impact driver, to which the Torx bit said, "Actually, I'd like to settle down here, inside this hole, and I'll wait for someone who deserves to have a toolkit to come along."
You just snapped the fucking bit. You absolute... I just don't know what to say about that, Tom. You're an absolute prick.
So in a single second, I'd absolutely fucked myself. If I'd just gone straight to the drill press, I would have been able to remove that quite easily. But now I had a piece of hardened steel in the centre of the hole that's going to want to throw any drill bit into the softer aluminium of the leg either side. Bollocks. I went through quite a process trying to rescue it, but all I got was a massive hole, which serves as a lesson to just stop and think. I went on the hunt for another fork leg, but as you can imagine, it's rare anyone's just selling that part, or even just a single leg. There are a few left legs out there, but never a right. Eventually I decided to get a pair, as at least I can carry on, plus I'll have some additional donor parts to work with. With the new forks here, I checked to see if the stanchions were in good condition, as it may prove more sensible to stick with these bottoms and rebuild these, but to be honest, they were pretty similar to mine. Plus I still fancied the future-proof peace of mind I was going to get from the new stanchions. Wish me luck for number 3. Bummer. Well, at least this time, I've learned my lesson and I took it straight to the drill press to drill out the grub screw. I managed to get it out quite easily, and I removed any debris that was left inside. Then I span it over and removed the compression adjuster. I took out the pinch bolts, which I may end up actually using because my ones have got that gold anodizing that will have to come off. The damper rod bolt wasn't even letting go of the fork leg, so I switched from 18 volts to 110 psi. Oh, I love that thing. So this leg's now ready to be separated from the stanchion. And while I was looking for new forks, I took the left side into a local bike mechanic to use his bigger tools and probably muscles to remove the stanchion. So now I have this one ready to keep going with. I started by plugging the various holes that I didn't want the blast media to get into, and then I took it to the sandblast to remove the old paint. Then I cleaned it, primed it, painted it, and gave it a matte clear top coat to protect the finish. I removed all the bungs and blasted it with air to make sure any blast media that had found its way in had gone. Then I put a generous amount of thread lock onto the threads of the stanchion. I span it in by hand and then tightened it with a screwdriver in the holes. I put some thread lock on a shiny new grub screw and fitted it into the hole. As you can see, this has been quite a journey, so to avoid making these videos too long, I've cut this one in half and I'm going to end this part here. The second half will follow next week. See you then.